I want to make it clear that during my 3 years in Laos, the Pathet Lao had played no part whatsoever in combat operations. Now, this is the myth of the contrary often appears in the press. There were a lot of stories, a lot of DRV propaganda, but the PL did nothing at all. They were smart, though. They waited and bided their time and learned techniques of political action. In '62, the Lao Prime Minister, Suvarnabhuma, a very fine man, very well attuned to what we were trying to do in Southeast Asia, he realized only too well that his own army, the Force Armée Royale, FAR as we called it, could not keep the NVA at bay. Even though since 1954 there had been a program of extensive military assistance to the Royal Army, FAR could never get its act together. Suvarna also saw that the Highlanders up in the northeastern Laos, Bill's friends out there, the people he discovered, were fighting very effectively as guerrillas against both the Pathet Lao, at that time Pathet Lao was fighting, against them and against the North Vietnamese military. Well, Suvarna smartly did ask for U.S. assistance. He asked that the Hmong tribal forces under Vang Pao be given arms and training secretly. He wanted it done as secretly as possible. It's a word that's very malleable. Who knows what it really means? That began the so-called secret war. It's an expression that we did not invent. I think it's creditable to the press primarily because under Suvarnabhuma's edict, the journalists could not get access to the combat zone. Well, as Bill has told you, we were already in limited contact with the Hmong at that time, training them, and Bill started the machinery running. The station carried on under a succession of sort of generations of chiefs, making a serious effort to keep it reasonably clandestine. It was not clandestine in the true sense of the term. Cover was skin deep, but we gave more than lip service to it as to the extent we could. Well, from that point on, the big turning point was the introduction of American forces into South Vietnam in '65. And from that point onward, it was a new kind of war in Vietnam, obviously, and in Laos as well. Then when, shortly thereafter, the U.S. Air Force began to attack operate against North Vietnam, the ambassador in Laos, our ambassador, saw, boy, we need that too, and put the word out, and the bombs began to come out against our targets. Well, through all that period, the agency's involvement with building up these guerrilla forces grew very steadily. The powers that be in Washington liked what we were doing out there. Now, they thought it was the cheap, even at that time, even in the mid-'60s, they thought it was the cheapest thing they were doing anywhere. And the money was never any problem. It wasn't all that cheap, but we were in effect supporting what they still saw as a low-cost guerrilla-type war with fairly limited exposure. So what did they do then? They called for more and more. You wouldn't believe how they demanded more with the passing of months at a time. Initially, the beginning, or the focal point of our effort, was in the Northeast, where Bill began working with the Hmong. The Hmong is a term that is the proper term. We used to call them Mayos in those days. We didn't know any better about how to deal with, how to treat the natives in their own language. They've been fighting very well and keeping the North Vietnamese advances pretty much at bay. Over time, they were trained and equipped more and more of them deployed in increasingly larger forces. The Vietnamese did likewise. They increased their own priorities. Their priorities focused on the Plain de Jars. I'm sure many of you heard about this beautiful upland plateau in northern Laos, northeastern Laos. It looks like a great, gorgeous golf course. Then you see the craters all over it. But the Vietnamese, through the preceding 200 years, always tried to maintain a dominant presence, not to take it over completely, but to have some influence and power over the local sultans. So they wanted it, and they fought for it all through the war. Well, over time, we also expanded our efforts into other parts of the country. We went to the northwest, MR1, and that an area of protection of the royal capital at Luang Prabang was the main priority, to the Laos especially. Suvarnabhuma, his defense minister, Siku, they wanted to keep the king in Luang Prabang safe at all times. Well, there we organized and trained some of the minority peoples. It's easier to work with minorities under these conditions. They want help. They don't always look too favorably upon the majority people, but we did. And did the same thing in MR3, the central part of Laos. And MR3 was important because that's where Route 9, the east-west highway from Vietnam, came right in. And Vietnamese incursions into South Laos, central Laos, came generally by Route 9. at last, we drew the irregulars, our own forces, from the lowland Lao population. There's a myth afloat that the Lao are no good. They can't do anything. Lowland Lao, when they're trained, armed, and equipped, can do pretty well. And in the MR4, the base we had there overlooking the Bolivens Plateau was very important because it was quite close to the trail. You could look down and see it there. And there we worked with lowland Lao again and with the Highlanders from the Saravan and Chepone region. Chepones are names that I'm sure are familiar to all of you. Okay, when I speak of expanding our efforts, and what are we talking about in terms of organization, types and numbers of troops, boots on the ground? When I got there in 1970, most of the small, lightly armed guerrilla units of earlier years had been reconstituted and trained as battalions up to around 300 men. At first, they were called SGUs, Special Guerrilla Units. Later, they were brought together, collected and trained and deployed eventually as mobile groups, Groupe Mobile in the French. There are many regiments. Depending on the situation, one GM consisted of 4 battalions, total of about 1,200 men. Now, we often deployed small units of company or platoon size or even less for special purposes. I won't go into any detail on them. The close support teams we had used to snuggle up to the North Vietnamese positions and listen to their tactical communications. They were very useful. Road washing teams, counting trucks and things in the trail, which Tom will tell you more about later. We had various kinds of ground reconnaissance teams which scouted and patrolled to find and identify enemy positions. At times, we were able to get them up north and into North Vietnamese territory, into DRV territory, and on occasion up across the Chinese border. I might add that that's a tough area to work in for people with the local people, and we found that John Sullivan's techniques of the box, as we called it then, did a lot to ferret out a lot of the phony operations we had found ourselves running. We had capture operations using small teams sent to enemy-controlled territory to ambush and capture individual North Vietnamese soldiers for later interrogations. The big problem we had up north especially was that, especially among the Hmong, the only good NVA was a dead one. And it was very hard to capture them up in the north. Then there were support troops of various kinds. We had replacements in training for logistics. We had guards, all kinds of odd troops. The total, very to give you a precise figure on the total, but we used the figure of about 35,000 men under arms in Laos during the height of the period, beginning in, say, 66, 67, coming through the end. Now, think of that, 35,000 men. Over a 10 or 12-year span, you have to visualize that those 35,000 were replaced 1, 2, maybe 3 times over through casualties and through attrition of various kinds. What do the NVA have against us up there? Well, we consulted the analysts, and they told us, scared us at first, the NVA have 80,000 troops in Laos. Well, we realized the preponderance was in the trail area. We didn't have them all with us. Our continuing concern were 2 divisions, really, the 312th and 316th, which spent most of the years of the mid and late 60s in northern Laos. Now, they were not jerry-built structures. They were tough Vietnamese main force units, and they were in the area, operating in and out of that area years and over the years, and they too were replaced again and again. The 2 divisions were backed up during the height of the war by 3 independent brigades up in the MR2. They had artillery, light and heavy, and boy, their artillery was something to see. These were tough, experienced main force divisions, as I said. Their artillery, I can't say enough for them. I'm an old artilleryman. They scared the heck out of everybody. The Lao, the Hmong, the Thais, they had these 130 howitzers. They were guns, which were outshot, outdistanced anything we had for them. Very tough. In the south, we had the 9th Division, not as good as the others, but still pretty tough and aggressive. And they carried the load for most of the incursions westward deep into Laos and almost as far as the Mekong River. Our side was always weak on artillery. I don't know why, really. The mysteries of indirect fire were beyond the comprehension of Lao soldiers. Not easy for us either, but we drew at times for help from the Thais, the Thai volunteers, for fire support. They had their limitations too. The Thais are a subject that I can't say too much about because it's still a very sensitive topic. They played an important role. When the situation on the ground got really hot, we came to rely on TAC air support from whatever supports we could get it. In the first instance, this meant the Royal Lao Air Force, an outfit you probably haven't heard much about. They were Laos, lowland Laos, some, not all of them. Hmong were Air Force pilots too, flying their old T-28 fighter bombers. They were a training plane, I guess, in the U.S. Air Force long before this activity came to pass. But they flew their T-28s, guided by the Raven Facts, who were in continual touch with our people on the ground, and their bombs were very, very effective against troops in contact until the Vietnamese artillery came into play. Those pilots, as I said, they were terrific airmen. They'd been trained in Thailand a lot, some trained in Laos too, on the ground. You won't believe it, but some of those pilots had flown more than 3,000 combat missions. And I think in the U.S. Air Force, any other Air Force, you'd have a hard time matching that. Not too many of those guys are on to talk about it now. Anyway, if we needed more than we could get, we asked for, from the Thais and the RLF, we asked for U.S. fast movers from the Air Force, usually from Udorn, the 713th Air Force. If we got what was available, they tried to do their best for us, but they had other priorities over there in North Vietnam and in South Vietnam too. At night, we often got the Spectre gunships. We're not too busy in the trail, but they came and helped us greatly. And we had the RLF Spookies, which were very good. Another thing we liked too, and we never heard too much about it, the A1Es at Nakhon Phanom. The Hmong loved them because they carried a huge load of bombs, and they could have a loiter time that seemed forever around their toilets. Nobody else could do that. Our fast movers came in and they're gone. But the A1Es were special. I'd like to say a word or two about how we were organized, bureaucratically organized, you might say, to run this fairly complex piece of machinery. As chief of station, I was situated in Vientiane. There I worked hand in glove with the ambassador. Mac Godley, G. McMurtry Godley, was my boss. He's a great guy and a wonderful ambassador. He was privy to everything we did. There were no secrets from the ambassador. You hear a lot about agency-ambassador relationships. Well, whatever they are where you may have been, they were great in Laos. Mac was my boss. We had no secrets. Whatever we did with his approval. And he didn't just say, approval, go ahead. He was on our backs half the time to see how it was going and to see it as close as he could get to firsthand. Well, when I was in Vientiane, I had my own staff there to help me out, but our primary operating base was in Udorn, Thailand. The base in Udorn supervised the day-to-day activities of all of our sub-bases. This was really the heartland of the military operation. They had good liaison with the 713th, and they often got good intelligence from them. And they got good service to the extent that 713th felt it's able to give us. When we felt we were not getting enough TAC air, I used to go to with the ambassador to Saigon and meet the Communist MACV and plead for more. Well, later on, at the beginning, that was tough. At the beginning, later in say, mid-72, General Abrams was fantastic. He became very, very helpful. So was General Vogt. In the late 72, they gave us, believe it or not, the almost complete dedication of the marvelous F-111s. It was another day at dawn for us up there, and especially up in areas like Boom Long, where they've been fighting the NVA for the past 12 years. We had some training bases, obviously, for the troops, for the irregulars, some in Laos, which we handled ourselves. Others were in Thailand, and there we were able to draw upon the special forces, whom we loved dearly.